See a little bit of snow over the high ground of Scotland and northern England on the leading edge of that. And that sets up the weather for much of next week. Will be remaining unsettled with some showers or rain, but temperatures will be on the up, particularly from midweek.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome, I'm Emily Carver, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that matter to you from across the country. And what's a Sunday lunchtime without a bit of law and order? This week, Keir Starmer set out his rather ambitious, arguably over-ambitious plans to cut crime. This morning, Rishi Sunak is fighting back. The Sunday papers are awash with reports he's going to clamp down hard on antisocial behaviour and petty crime. It looks like this is going to be a key theme ahead of the next election. So I want to know from you, who do you trust when it comes to crime? Sir Keir or Rishi Sunak? Then later in the show, I'll be talking to a barrister stroke climate activist on why he thinks it's okay or desirable even for lawyers to refuse to prosecute eco-activists and also refuse to act on behalf of clients involved in oil and gas. Are you worried perhaps that the legal profession is becoming a little bit too political? And tomorrow the new SNP leader will be announced. I'll be getting the very latest on what's been a rather dramatic contest. But first, let's get the news headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Offenders who commit antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to make good the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. Well, as part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told broadcasters this morning that nitrous oxide canisters are helping fuel antisocial behaviour, turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. Labour is establishing a review of the BBC's operations to look at the future of the broadcaster. It follows the controversy over Gary Lineker's suspension from Match of the Day and Richard Sharp helping Boris Johnson to secure a loan. The party says the independent BBC review panel will assess how best to ensure the future sustainability of the publicly funded broadcaster. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell says the organisation consistently finds itself at the centre of culture wars and that continuing the status quo is not an option. Scottish Labour is warning the incoming SNP leader to clear out the rot within their party. Deputy Leader Jackie Baillie is calling on the future First Minister to be more open and transparent. It's after figures revealed the SNP had lost 30,000 members in just 1 year, which it had previously denied. Leadership candidates Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan will find out tomorrow who will become Scotland's next leader. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's struck a deal to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, which borders Ukraine. Speaking on state TV last night, he insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States stationing nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. But a top security advisor to Ukraine's president says the plans would destabilise Belarus, claiming Russia has effectively taken the country hostage. US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado killed at least 26 people. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Dozens have been injured and around 11,000 people are still without power. Drone footage shows an entire town in Mississippi flattened. President Joe Biden described the images as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. Residents say there was no safe place to hide.
This is the worst I have ever. This is devastating. I have so many family members, friends, memories that has been destroyed.
It's like a freight train that comes through. They thought it lasted 30 minutes. It was 20 seconds. One of the homeowners, said they finally woke up and they looked up and they thought they were dead.
In the face of potential arrest, Donald Trump held a defiant rally in Texas yesterday to kick off his 2024 Republican nomination campaign. It was the former president's first public appearance since speculating last week that he could soon be arrested over hush money payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. He lashed out against the investigation, claiming he's the most innocent man in the history of the US.
Prosecutorial misconduct is their new tool, and they are willing to use it at levels never seen before. The stakes of this election could not be more clear. Either we surrender to the demonic forces abolishing and demolishing and happily doing so, or we defeat them in a landslide on November 5th, 2024.
Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng have been caught up in a sting operation, quoting thousands of pounds to consult for a non-existent company. The two former cabinet ministers were approached by a fake South Korean firm set up by a campaign group led by donkeys. Mr. Hancock told them his daily rate would be £10,000, whilst Mr. Kwarteng said he would expect to be paid a similar amount every month. MPs are allowed to seek employment outside of Parliament, and there's no accusation of any wrongdoing. You're up to date on GB News. Now, though, it's back to Emily.
So, washing police cars, picking up litter in jumpsuits, and unpaid shop work. These are just some of the Prime Minister's latest plans to crack down on antisocial behaviour. The pilot scheme will be rolled out across 10 areas in England and Wales. It'll see offenders clean up their crimes within 48 hours of being handed punishments. Rishi Sunak says it will make justice immediate. Joining me now to discuss that and much more is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. May I just ask you quickly, before we get on to the crime, which is very much the topic of the day on this show, about this Led by Donkeys campaign. Seems a bit of a stitch-up.
Quite something to see the video of former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, former Health Secretary, currently doesn't have the Conservative whip, Matt Hancock, and Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 committee, all on video talking to this non-existent consultancy firm in South Korea, which was set up by Led by Donkeys, about potentially charging themselves out at around £10,000 per day for consultancy services. Now, of course, there's no laws being broken here. It's perfectly within the rules for members of Parliament to have second jobs, and many of them do. But, of course, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when public sector workers are on strike, saying they're not getting enough money, they're having to go to food banks, it's not the best, is it?
It very much opens up that perpetual debate, it seems, about second jobs. Should MPs have them? Should they be paid X, Y and Z? But this was a sort of consultancy, which again is a very murky area, isn't it, for politicians? But, I mean, Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng, not the most popular politicians at the moment. But Sir Graham Brady, this isn't a good look for him.
No, it's not. And quite surprising to see him on there. And also Gavin Williamson, former Education Secretary, was approached and had a bit of a chat and then decided it was not for him. So whether he smelt a rat or not, but apart from the potential conflicts of interest and the rights and wrongs of MPs having second jobs, and is 82,000 to be an MP sufficient recompense, there's also the sort of national security implications. That where was the due diligence? This was not a real company. This was set up by Led by Donkeys. And it appears that these MPs were more than happy to chat with them at some length to companies that didn't exist. So you do wonder about...
You certainly do wonder. Also, if you haven't seen this video, it is toe curling. I couldn't even watch it all because it was that cringe-worthy. You're thinking, oh, God, how awful. But anyway, let's move on to law and order, crime and punishment. Keir Starmer was in Stoke-on-Trent, was he not, earlier this week, talking about how he was going to cut crime massively. Very ambitious plans. Rishi Sunak all over the Sunday papers saying similar.
Yes, so Keir Starmer, it's one of Labour's 5 missions to make Britain's streets safe. Rishi Sunak also, of course, at the beginning of the year came out with his 5 priorities. Crime wasn't explicitly mentioned amongst them, but clearly the government know that safety of people on the streets, trust in the police, antisocial behaviour is a huge issue that people really care very passionately about, and feel that recently police are not present on the streets, crimes are not being solved, and people are being let down. So the government very keen to push this. It's going to be formally announced tomorrow, but we know there's 10 trial areas in England and Wales. Then the plan is to roll it out next year, and cracking down on antisocial behaviour, vandalism, graffiti, etc. The idea is, as they say, immediate justice. So at the point at which the punishment's handed down, the theory goes, the perpetrators will then be set to work within 2 days in high-vis jackets or jumpsuits or whatever, cleaning up the graffiti. If it's already been sorted, they'll be doing other sorts of community work. Now, of course, it's going to be popular, but Is it really going to happen?
Yes,
Where's the money going to come from?
Yes, I mean, it sounds brilliant because antisocial behaviour really is a blight on many areas of the country. I mean, I see it firsthand all the time. I'm sure most of our viewers do too. But without the police officers on the street to do this, it will be very difficult indeed, and just, another slogan, another political promise that won't happen. But who knows? Perhaps they will, give us the action we're asking for, but we shall see. And in terms of Keir Starmer, he was up in Stoke, of course. He was actually quoting Margaret Thatcher, which was rather bizarre. Did you see that? He said, "The rule of law is the foundation for everything. Margaret Thatcher called it the first duty of government, and she was right." I mean, is this going to be what appeals to the Red Wall?
Well, clearly Labour know, don't they, that the Red Wall is going to be critical in the next election. They also suspect that Rishi Sunak doesn't have the appeal of Boris Johnson in the Red Wall. But does Keir Starmer have that appeal? And, of course, traditionally, the Conservatives have seen to be the party of law and order, but there's been huge cuts, haven't there? After the financial crisis, austerity, police numbers dropped significantly. Now, OK, the Conservatives say they're recruiting another 20,000 officers. They say that funding police has gone up 45% since 2020, but people don't feel that it's getting better. They don't see that difference. They don't see crimes being solved. Very often now, if you're burgled, you don't expect there to be a conviction.
Don't I know it? Yes, it's very, very hard to get a police officer interested in a burglary, which is not a minor crime, in my view. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about the SNP later, please. Political correspondent Catherine Forster there running through some of the top political stories. So, Keir Starmer has, as we were saying, been rather ambitious in his promises to clamp down on crime if he gets into power. He has pledged to halve levels of violence against women and girls within a decade, also to halve serious violent crime, and bring public confidence in the police and criminal justice system to its highest ever level. The Labour leader claims Rishi Sunak's party are out of touch and too detached from the reality of life in some of the country's most deprived communities. But Rishi Sunak has come out swinging today with his new scheme to combat antisocial behaviour. That's all over today's Sunday papers. I want to know from you. Please do get in touch. Who do you trust to solve crime, Labour or the Conservatives? Joining me first to discuss this is Matthew McKinnon, Conservative political consultant and director of Transmit Digital. And we've got Labour political commentator James Matthewson. Thank you very much indeed, both of you, for joining me this afternoon. So, Matthew, I'll start with you. We've heard there from Catherine, Rishi Sunak setting out all these different ways in which he's going to combat antisocial behaviour. Why should the public believe that this time it's different?
Well, absolutely. I think that Rishi Sunak needs to come out fighting here and really put across a number of policies to really gain back the public's credibility when it comes to crime. But there is no silver bullet when it comes to crime. And that's what people need to remember, that crime is such a complex issue. It's taught at university and criminology courses. There have been countless reports and papers published in over decades on the topic to try and see what can be done. But it's not a simple thing to resolve. But the Conservative government and the Home Secretary seem very, very keen to really get on with crime and make it a bigger issue ahead of the general election next year and tackle it intensely. But I think a lot of the public are wearing thin of promises and then what's actually being seen delivered on the streets. So, for example, a lot of people are seeing the government and the police force mainly as, in this country, having a two-tier system. They're seeing the government saying one thing about cracking down on certain areas, really taking burglary seriously, and as you just mentioned, and then they see the police focusing on hate crimes over burglaries. And, the Home Secretary is then going on to Twitter and saying that they need to focus on burglaries, but at the same time, they're not really listening. So I think the police force really aren't listening to the government as much as it should be. And I think that's a really big concern for the government going forward.
James, Keir Starmer clearly wants to steal crime from the Conservatives. The Conservatives have been known as the party of law and order, but clearly crime is pretty high in large parts of our country. What's Keir Starmer going to do differently, do you reckon?
I mean, we say that about the Conservatives being the party of, law and order, but I don't think that's been the case for a long time at all. I mean, since we've had those cuts to neighbourhood police officers, the austerity cuts right through the early, 2010s, we've seen absolutely, no evidence from the Conservatives about being the party of law and order. And I think it's time, for the Labour Party to step up and offer these radical solutions. And what we're seeing from Rishi Sunak in comparison to Keir Starmer's plans, in my opinion, is stick and plaster politics. It's really very tokenistic. This idea of you'll go out, you'll put your high vis on, you'll scrub some graffiti off the walls and stuff. It just seems to be very tokenistic. It's kind of like the modern equivalent of the ducking stool or the stocks. Where you'll do your time for half an hour and then you're out. And obviously people will see that and they'll see it in place and they'll see it happening. But whether it actually makes a difference or not and changes anything, I really, really doubt it.
But James, some people aren't sure whether they can trust Keir Starmer, to say the least. He's talking tough on crime, but of course he did campaign to stop the deportation of foreign criminals who then went on to reoffend. There's also some confusion over his attitudes towards drugs. Of course, many people within the Labour Party would like to see drugs decriminalised or even legalised. If possible. Keir Starmer seems to think they're an absolute blight on humanity. He said cannabis ruins lives. So it's hard to sort of see exactly where Labour are going on this.
Yeah, and I think it's a fine line that we tread. I mean, for me, the important thing is, as a Labour Party member, and I'm not Keir Starmer's biggest champion or biggest fan, but I think he's got the leadership that it takes to run the country, especially compared to the shower that we've got at present. And I really do think when you look at the wider picture of this focus on which party will focus on the bigger picture of crime. As Matthew said rightly, crime's a very complex issue. We've got all the societal issues at the heart of it, the fact of community issues that connect to it. And this is a bigger issue about, funding those community assets that have been taken away over the years that have contributed to higher rates of poverty and therefore higher levels of crime. So I think the only party that's proposing anything radical and actually doing so in power as well. We saw Yvette Cooper referencing Kim McGuinness. I'm quite lucky to live in beautiful Northumberland up here, and we've got Kim as our police and crime commissioner, and she's doing radical stuff when it comes to domestic violence and crimes against women. So seeing those policies taken from being in practice by a police and crime commissioner and transferred into government, it gives you hope that you can actually tackle some of these in the long run, rather than just tokenistic, do your time in the high vis and you'll be fine next week. We're going to really get to the source of the issue, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, certainly to some extent, Matthew. Some of the things that they're considering, the government are considering, that is, on-the-spot fines for those caught fly tipping will more than double. Littering, spraying graffiti could be hit with fines of £500. Plans for suspects to be tested for drugs as part of a hotspot policing strategy. Also, banning the sale and possession of nitrous oxide, aka laughing gas. All of this depends on police officers being on the streets and witnessing these crimes. Now, I don't know about you, but I was walking around an area of London the other weekend, and there was clearly crime going on the streets. No police officers noticed. They just got away with it.
Absolutely, and I think we all see it every day. You just pop out for a walk outside of my apartment in Cardiff and walk around the corner, and there's fresh graffiti on the walls quite regularly. There's nitrous oxide canisters, just in plain sight on the weekends that have been dumped there by youths. And I think there is a public perception that the police that they've been let down by the police in recent years. I think the police really do need to step up their level of basic community support and, really take it up a level, because the public really do expect the police to get the basics right. And when they see on the TV, that the police really are dealing with issues such as online hate crimes, and they're not dealing with the day-to-day bread and butter issues that they really should be. And when they then go on Facebook and Twitter and see them.
But Matthew, is that more the fault of the government than it is the police? Because it is the government that have created this extremely complex legislation. It seems to me sometimes the police don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They think they're supposed to be policing Twitter. They think they're supposed to be policing the streets. And all of this legislation is just making it pretty difficult for them.
Well, the Home Secretary has openly said on a few cases, such as the young boy, such a few times we've seen them in Yorkshire, where she's come out and said, you're not applying the law correctly to the police. And I think the Home Secretary does need to bring the police in. But remember, a lot of crime has changed in recent years. We've now gone onto a system of society where a lot of things are done now online. We're in a much more globalised world, and the police are trying to react to that, and so are politicians. And there's obviously going to be issues there where people are caught in the crossfire of trying to resolve those issues, because there are serious issues when there are death threats online and that sort of thing. But people tweeting their political opinions online should never in 1,000 years contemplate being arrested.
I mean, James, that is a point. I mean, people see Keir Starmer, they see that he's been photographed taking the knee, which was then something that police officers also did at Black Lives Matter protests, I believe. We also saw the police being quite weak when it came to Extinction Rebellion. People do perceive the Labour Party as being in support of these kind of groups, wrongly or rightly. It does seem like Keir Starmer is happy to go along with the sort of latest trends, political activism, etc., etc. Do you think that people might look at Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and think, nah, you're not going to be tough on crime? You're too woke, basically.
Too woke. I'd be hesitant to call anti-racism a trend, to be honest. But
no, taking the knee. That's not what I said. Taking the knee.
Taking the knee is not a trend. It's something that people have the right to do in a free society, to stand up for what they believe in. Do
you think police officers should take the knee, James?
At the core of what you do, I think police officers should have the right to do what they wish to do to show solidarity with communities. And I mean, if you think about the issues between race relations and the police in this country, and the mistrust in communities, that have faced police violence, it's I mean, it's the same up here where I'm from in the northeast. We've had decades of mistrust of the police because of right back to the miners' strikes and the violence used against communities here in policing. It leaves a long effect and scars that last for many, many decades. So you've got to try and get around that. And I don't envy the police in their task. I really don't. I think, as Matthew says rightly, that it's about the tools, having the right tools to deal with the job. But I do think we're looking at, we're talking about, online hate crime and all the rest. We shouldn't play down any crime as being less important. And the police should be able to deal with
I think you've got to prioritise. You've certainly got to prioritise, don't you?
But what we're saying is we're getting too used to the fact that the police have got a very limited amount of budget to deal with. And that should be increased so that everybody can have the support and feel safe. But I'll tell you what concerns me more, and what I'm really pleased with to see from Keir Starmer, is the fact that, as he said, 300 women a day in this country are raped, and 3 of them will see prosecutions from that. It's absolutely disgraceful, and I don't think anybody would stand by it. So seeing a plan to tackle that and to make that a priority is vitally important.
Oh, I definitely think that's spot on, don't you, Matthew? I mean, crime against women and girls often goes unreported to begin with. Then when it's reported, it's not dealt with, and then the criminal justice system fails to prosecute.
Absolutely, and that should be one of the main areas of focus for the police. Instead of going to pride marches and dancing alongside them and all this sort of thing, which a lot of people get very frustrated at when they see resources being wasted in that way. And I think there's some real areas of concern in this country with certain crimes that aren't being dealt with as seriously. Now we've covered burglaries, we've now covered rape as well, and these areas really need to be taken seriously. But everyone knows that Labour aren't serious on a lot of these issues. Everyone knows that a lot of the Labour front bench are very weak when it comes on crime. They don't want to resolve a lot of the issues. They want to legalise and decriminalise a lot of drugs, but at least be honest about it. Tell the public that's your opinion, that's where you stand. Don't try and out-conservative the Conservatives on law and order, because it just simply isn't going to work.
It does feel a little bit that way. Anyway, that is all we've got time for. Thank you so much to Matthew McKinnon, the Conservative political consultant and director of Transmit Digital, and the Labour political commentator, James Matthews. And some difference of opinion there. Let me know what you think. Do you trust Labour or the Tories when it comes to law and order, or perhaps you trust neither? It does seem like crime is always getting worse, depending on where you live, of course. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. Lots more coming up on today's show. We will be sticking with law and order for a bit, though. Over 30,000 inmates were released from prisons across England and Wales. A new project has been set up to give ex-young offenders a second chance at life. This stuff is good, actually. Our reporter, Theo Chicomba, has that story next. But first, we'll take a look at the weather.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week, and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away, and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening, and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now further south, there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away from this, skies will clear to start the new week, allowing for plenty of sunshine and fine and dry weather. It'll be feeling pleasant in that sunshine, but temperatures will not be much higher tomorrow than what we'll have seen today, with highs of around 11 degrees. As we go into Monday afternoon and evening, we do cling on to those bright, clearer skies across the north and the east as we go through to Monday night. But further west, we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic as that next low pressure system moves in. So a cloudier, milder night here. But across the northern and eastern areas, we could just see a patchy frost still to start Tuesday morning. But it will be a short-lived frost as that cloud and rain will quickly move in from the west through Tuesday morning. We could just see a little bit of snow over the high ground of Scotland and northern England on the leading edge of that. And that sets up the weather for much of next week. We'll be remaining unsettled with some showers or rain, but temperatures will be on the up, particularly from midweek.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back and good afternoon. It's just gone 1:30. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB Newsroom. Offenders who commit antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to make good the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. As part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told broadcasters this morning that nitrous oxide canisters are helping fuel antisocial behaviour, turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. The US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado killed 26 people. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Dozens have been injured and around 11,000 residents are still without power. Joe Biden has described the images coming out of Mississippi as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng have been caught up in a sting operation quoting thousands of pounds to consult for a non-existing company. The two former cabinet ministers were approached by a fake South Korean firm set up by Campaign Group led by donkeys. Mr Hancock told them his daily rate would be £10,000, whilst Mr Kwarteng said he would expect to be paid a similar amount every month. There's no accusation of any wrongdoing. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Hello. Now, you've been getting in touch about whether you trust the Conservatives or Labour with law and order. But first, over 30,000 inmates were released from prisons across England and Wales in 2022, according to the latest Ministry of Justice figures. Many ex-offenders struggle to find work. Employers might be hesitant to take them on. The Inside Out project, though, gives ex-offenders a second chance while also helping to reduce the economic and social costs of reoffending. Our national reporter, Theo Chicomba, has been to meet them.
After weeks of preparation, the Inside Out store is open. Ex-offenders like Tico, who was remanded in custody for a case involving drugs, have been receiving training from industry professionals to design and launch their own range, as well as expand their CVs.
We went to LinkedIn and had a great experience there, so I was learning business skills, I was learning how to market myself, I was learning how to be creative. And due to that whole experience, it led me to start my own business. So I'm a life coach, I'm an inspirational speaker, and I do modelling on the side as well. But it was kind of the baby steps that I took with Inside Out that allowed me to then just go full steam ahead.
Research from the Prison Reform Trust shows that over 80% of prison leavers fail to find permanent work a year after leaving prison. Almost half reoffend within a year, which is why projects like this are pivotal for people like Chris, who was in prison for 5 years.
It's a great opportunity. You meet so many people that can help you and are willing to help you. It's been great for me personally to network and build my network of people to pursue the dreams that I have to do. And yeah, Greg's been a big influence in helping me do that. My design was a hoodie that I'm wearing, and it's about you're still able, whether you've got a disability in prison, as long as you've got your mind. So it was just a personal meaning to me to have that on a shirt. So yeah, and that's why I designed it like this.
Prison leavers face a number of barriers that make it challenging to rebuild their lives, from economic hardship to finding work opportunities. Inside Out want to change the narrative attached to them.
You know, trying to get a job when they have criminal records and just being given a second chance is nigh impossible, because the employer always wants to know what they've done, and rightly so, but they've spent their time in jail, they've done their sentences, they've served their punishment. So as a society, what do? Do we throw away the key and say, well, they're bad, stay away? But given the right opportunity, like the Inside Out project, these guys are thriving.
The hope is to see a change in these guys and lift their aspirations, and that opportunities like this can help them and others in similar situations reach their full potential. Theo Chicomba, GB News.
What a good thing to do there. Now, you've been getting in touch with me about the big topic of the day, law and order. Dee has said, I don't trust either Sunak or Starmer on most things, let alone crime. All the parties within Parliament have made a complete hash of everything. Therefore, I will be voting for reform next time. The others have had their chance and failed. I think reform should now be given a try. They certainly couldn't be any worse. Well, a pretty damning assessment of the two main parties there. Mark says, trust Sunak or Starmer to fix crime? I wouldn't trust either of them not to mess up a glass of water. Well, there you go. Not much trust for Sunak or Starmer, it seems. Tricia says, this should have been done years ago. Those who offend should be made to work in the community to clear up their mess or help to improve the local area. Yes, there's been quite a lot of talk about people who are victims of crime choosing or having a say in what the perpetrator has to do by way of punishment. Could be quite interesting, but I think, you know, graffiti, someone should clean the graffiti off the wall. I think that's pretty basic. Liz says, we never look at the causes of crime, which are often societal, just lock up or punish the culprits. Well, yes, as our previous commentator was saying, poverty often leads to criminal activity, although a lot of people who don't have much means would, I'm sure, dispute that. Rob says neither Sunak or Starmer are worth trusting to deliver a crime reduction, both weak and pathetic. Police are not up to the job either. You paint a picture of anarchy, Rob. Yes, I think morale in the police and also their priorities are a little questionable sometimes. Helen says, I think that it's ludicrous that someone should receive a prison sentence and only serve half the time. I agree the justice service needs an overhaul and there should be more police on the beat. Yes, the government keeps promising more police officers on the beat, out on the streets, but it never seems to happen. I certainly don't see police officers when we need them, as I was saying. In London sometimes it can feel a little bit lawless, particularly in the evenings. Please do keep your views coming in. We've got them coming in thick and fast, actually, on this one. And do subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're at it. We're at GB News. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We've got plenty more to come this afternoon. This week, the education regulator Ofsted made the decision not to pause school inspections in the wake of a head teacher's death. We'll be discussing school inspections and that decision, whether they're a good thing, these Ofsted inspections, next. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now further south there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away from this, skies will clear to start the new week, allowing for plenty of sunshine and fine and dry weather. It'll be feeling pleasant in that sunshine, but temperatures will not be much higher tomorrow than what we'll have seen today, with highs of around 11 degrees. As we go into Monday afternoon and evening, we do cling on to those bright, clearer skies across the north and the east as we go through to Monday night. But further west, we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic as that next low pressure system moves in. So a cloudier, milder night here. But across the northern and eastern areas, we could just see a patchy frost still to start Tuesday morning. But it will be a short-lived frost as that cloud and rain will quickly move in from the west through Tuesday morning. We could just see a little bit of snow over the high ground of Scotland and northern England on the leading edge of that. And that sets up the weather for much of next week. We'll be remaining unsettled with some showers or rain, but temperatures will be on the up, particularly from midweek.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. Now, Ofsted have decided not to pause school inspections in the wake of a head teacher's death. That's been met with some disappointment from teachers across the country. Ruth Perry took her own life while waiting for a critical Ofsted report. But the Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman, said preventing inspections would be against children's best interests. What do you think? Should Ofsted pause inspections in the light of this head teacher's death? Or do you think these inspections are, well, essential? Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Tony Breslin, author of Bubble Schools and The Long Road from Lockdown. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Tony Breslin. Can you start by setting out why teachers find Ofsted so tough?
Well, look, it's a public judgment on how well your school is doing. And the real problem is that it's a public judgment summed up in a single word. Schools are far more complex institutions than that. So the call really is to recognise the complexity of schools, but also we're talking about a profession on its knees after lockdown, after the recovery from lockdown. School leaders in particular are exhausted. And so we need, in this Ofsted framework, Ofsted do put the well-being of the head teacher and of the staff front and central. I think they need to be seen to practice that in the way that inspections are gone about.
Tony, is the issue with high-stakes assessment? Do you agree? Do you believe that there shouldn't be such a sort of one-off assessment, that it's too focused on that particular day? Is that the issue?
I'm not convinced. I don't think the profession is running away from judgment or inspection. We can recognise that these things can have a positive impact. But the idea that you can sum up everything about a school in one word is incredibly flawed. So we need, there are 4 judgments in individual areas that that schools could be acknowledged in. And the interesting thing about the Ruth Perry tragedy is that the issue was about safeguarding. And it was about some of the detail of the school's safeguarding mechanisms. The school's educational practice was excellent. So actually, we need to reflect that. It does strike me that, yes, safeguarding is absolutely vital, but I really wonder if that is to be done in a different way by an agency that's a specialist in this field. So I think separating out safeguarding from the framework might be one thing, but let's come away from one-word judgments. Not fair on teachers, not fair on schools, and not fair on parents, because they simplify to too great a level.
Tony, I think most people are pretty open-minded when it comes to, well, possibly your recommendations that you've just given there, but also to the whole idea of how schools should be regulated. My mother was a teacher, and she said that these assessments would cause great anxiety. There'd be such an attention on appearing as if everything is perfect on that day when the inspectors are in. So much anxiety, so much stress surrounding that, when actually it's much like when you teach students just to revise for a particular test. You sort of forget everything else that goes into being good in a test or having a functioning school. But one of the big issues, and I'm not sure how Ofsted, if they assess this in one way or another, I'm sure they do, but one of the issues that keeps coming back when you talk to teachers is the problem of behaviour. How do we deal with that? Because you can be the best teacher in the world, you can have the nicest school in the world, but if the students are running riot and disrupting, it's all a bit hopeless.
Well, it would be, Emily, but there are very, very, very few schools where that is the case. Often the source of poor behaviour is poor curriculum and so forth. So schools that teach well, that engage their pupils, they tend to have fewer issues with behaviour. Of course, we don't know what's going on in children's wider lives and so forth, and sometimes that comes into the classroom, and indeed the behaviour of parents can do. But actually, I wouldn't want to paint a picture of our schools where they were all going to hell in a handcart over behaviour. They emphatically are not. If I look at when I came into the profession 35 or so years ago, I think it's longer, but I won't check, behaviour has improved enormously. Teaching approaches have improved enormously. I don't doubt that inspection may have played a part in that, but the level of anxiety, and I speak as somebody I'm chair of governors at a school federation, and one of our schools inspected a couple of weeks ago. It's ignored, and we're in the so-called Ofsted window. We're waiting for the phone call on the other school. And it's enormously stressful. That doesn't mean it doesn't bring out the very best in people at times and all the rest of it. But I really think the single word judgment needs to be looked at, and we need to ask the question, are Ofsted the best people to look at safeguarding? What about separating out safeguarding and having a short annual visit specifically about that from, I don't know, it could be the health and safety executive or a body particularly expert in that field. This looks like a judgment that seems to be questionable. Of course, we don't know, but seems to be questionable in that particular area. It's brought the whole school down, and with that single word, inadequate, destroy the work of a very fine school leader over years and years and years. We have to move away from that, and it seems to me that we now need to have that debate. Ruth Perry's legacy might be that we end up with a better, more nuanced inspection framework. And one other thing, and I've called for this in the book, I think we need to rethink of Ofsted not just as an inspection body, but as an office for school development. So that actually, we've got a lot of the finest brains in education working in Ofsted, just measuring and assessing and inspecting. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, but let's harness their expertise to make our schools better, not just to measure where they are.
That sounds thoroughly sensible, Tony, because it seems to me that you'll have a school on one corner of the street and it has a big flag or whatever you'd call it, a banner saying outstanding. Obviously, another school down the road who's got, I don't know what these assessments are, it needs improvement or bad. You're not going to fly that out. But also these things can change quite quickly, can they not? So having a kind of regulator, having a kind of inspector that helps with the development of the school and helps to improve it can only be a good thing, I would say. But it's interesting that you said behaviour has got better, because I've often heard that teachers are being asked to do more and more and more in terms of even social care type things, dealing with family issues. Very difficult. Sometimes the parents aren't on the teacher's side when it comes to discipline, etc., etc. Those are real problems. You can't bat away the issue of disruption.
I'm not Emily. And I'm not saying the issue of behaviour hasn't become more challenging. I'm saying the profession has risen magnificently to that challenge. And certainly, I mean, one of the things that we've learned through lockdown is that a lot of parents, I think, with the challenge of homeschooling and what have you, became more empathetic about the challenge teachers face. A small number lost, in a sense, have become more intransigent, become difficult. And I hear this in various spots. And sometimes particular families might use up an incredible amount of school time. That's not their children's fault.
And of course we've...
what's best for the children.
Yes, and Tony, of course, we've seen the numbers of children who have seemed to have disappeared entirely from the education system since lockdown. That really is a travesty. Tens of thousands is what I've seen. Children, the ghost children, they call them. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Tony Breslin, there, author of Bubble Schools and the Long Road from Lockdown, giving us his perspective on Ofsted and how it could be changed for the better. Now, a spokesperson at the Department of Education has said in a statement, inspections are hugely important as they hold schools to account for their educational standards, and parents greatly rely on the ratings to give them confidence in choosing the right school for their child. We offer our deep condolences to the family and friends of Ruth Perry following her tragic death, and are continuing to provide support to Caversham Primary School at this difficult time. Let me know what you think about Ofsted. Do you think it is working as it should? Do you think these one-word answers, these one-word reports are fair, outstanding, bad, needs improvement? I can imagine how anxiety-inducing it can be. Do let me know, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Now, moving on. One of the biggest stories of the week has been the ongoing riots in France, and it's turned into one of the biggest royal stories too. As a result of the protests, King Charles III's state visit to the country has been postponed. That was after a request by President Emmanuel Macron. The trip to Paris and Bordeaux had been due to begin today, actually. Security threats, including graffiti reading "Death to the King" and "Charles III, do you know the guillotine?" convinced Macron to postpone the visit, understandably. Joining me now is royal commentator and historian Rafe Haydel-Mancu. Rafe, I mean, clearly this was a sensible move by Macron.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, in light of those terrible protests we've seen, not just for the pension age, but also as well for the general cost of living crisis, I don't think there was any other decision that could be made. I mean, you can just imagine the PR for the two palaces, the Elysee Palace and Buckingham Palace, if this had gone ahead, because, just the scene alone of the king and the president surrounded by the extravagance of a state visit. Nothing is more glamorous than a state visit, especially, the glittering white tie and tiaras ball that will be held, the state dinner, I should say, at the Palace of Versailles, would immediately draw comparisons, of course, with the extravagance of Louis XVI during that other cost of living crisis in 1789, which, of course, we all know culminated in that French Revolution. The timing is a shame. As you said, they were going to go to Bordeaux, but the Bordeaux town hall was actually set alight. One of the key factors that would have actually spurred Macron's decision too. But the timing is a shame because, as we know, after several years of tense relationships, there seems to be a bit of a new entente cordiale between Britain and France, with Rishi Sunak and his really petite Macron enjoying something of a bromance. And the visit would actually have been the first occasion when the king would have addressed, the first time a British monarch actually would have addressed the Senate. But this will go ahead at some point in the future, so all those plans will just be put onto the back burner. And the state visit that we're expecting to Germany will go ahead, where the king will also become the first British monarch to address the Bundestag.
Rafe, did you just call the Prime Minister Macron petite? That was very, very, very diplomatic of you. Very nice indeed.
The French term, you know?
The French term, of course, yes, of course. So King Charles, how will he be taking this? I imagine he was probably very much looking forward to it. His first international state visit, was it not going to be?
Well, of course, as we know with the election of a president, for example, the very first countries you visit on a state visit takes a lot of time and consideration and careful planning, and there's great emphasis and there's great importance behind there, subtly. And of course, we know how important the monarchy is as a soft power weapon in the British diplomatic arsenal. So the British government were actually the key force behind this visit. The king was very supportive of it as well, and he'll naturally be very disheartened that it couldn't go ahead. But of course, His Majesty has had more than his fair share of knocks since succeeding to the throne, and I think it would have been extremely unwise in light of everything else that's happened in recent months to do this, particularly when we are literally almost just a month away from the coronation itself.
Yes, I'm sure he'll get over it, and hopefully it will be rescheduled sooner rather than later, but that depends on what goes on in France, I suppose, more than anything. Now, I want to ask you about something else. Prince Andrew is back. Apparently, he wants to reveal all in some tell-all biography.
Yes, look, as if one spare wasn't enough, Prince Harry, we've now got the original spare, Prince Andrew, contemplating his own tell-all memoir, Spare 2.0, as I think some are calling it. The motivation, we're told, is that Andrew wants to be able to give his side of the story about his relationship with Jacob Epstein, believing that no one else will do it if he doesn't. And if those reports are true, I would just remind Prince Andrew what happened the last time he tried to put the record straight, which resulted in that catastrophic BBC Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis. I'd also remind him, actually, that although Prince Harry's book made a lot of money, it was an unmitigated PR disaster for both him and for Meghan. It was upon the publication of that book that their poll rating plummeted to new lows, whereby in America they actually have a lower approval rating now than Prince Andrew himself. And of course, they made themselves great figures of ridicule by everyone from South Park to Chris Rock and late-night American talk show host. So does Andrew really want to expose himself to that sort of ridicule? I think it seems actually that it's financial necessity that's actually the driving force here. We know that he's fallen on relative hard times financially, and he's a man who enjoys expensive comforts. He didn't get any inheritance from the Queen, and the King is dead set to slash royal funding, which means that Prince Andrew may not be able to afford to live at Royal Lodge, and he's dead set against moving to the downsizing to Frogmore Cottage. But I just wonder, actually, whether, if I can end on this by saying, I think maybe this is all just a bit of a ruse by Prince Andrew, perhaps, to make this, have this story leaking now just before the coronation. This might be the only form of leverage he has to get the palace to meet at the negotiating table.
Well, there's a question for our viewers at home. Would you buy Prince Andrew's autobiography, the original spare, perhaps? Thank you very much indeed, Rafe Hale-Manku, royal commentator and historian, bring us up to date on the royal news. You are watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We have lots more coming up on the show this afternoon, including activist lawyers who are refusing to prosecute climate activists. Is the legal profession becoming a little bit too political? But first, let's go to a break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, good afternoon, welcome. I'm Emily Carver. I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that matter to you from across the country. Plenty more coming up this afternoon. 120 top lawyers went against the bar this week and announced that they will refuse their services in prosecuting climate activists. I'll be asking, should lawyers be political activists? All that to come, but first, it's the news headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Emily, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Offenders who commit to antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to fix the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. As part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told broadcasters that nitrous oxide canisters are helping to fuel antisocial behaviour by turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. Labour is establishing a review of the BBC operations to look at the future of the broadcaster. It follows the controversy over Gary Lineker's suspension from Match of the Day and Richard Sharp helping Boris Johnson to secure an £800,000 loan. The party says the independent BBC review panel will assess how to ensure the future sustainability of the publicly funded broadcaster. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell says the organisation consistently finds itself at the centre of culture wars and that continuing this status quo is not an option. Scottish Labour is warning the incoming SNP leader to clear out the rot within their party. Deputy leader Jackie Baillie is calling on the future First Minister to be more open and transparent. It's after figures revealed the SNP had lost 30,000 members in just over a year, which the party had previously denied. Leadership candidates Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan will find out tomorrow who will become Scotland's next leader. Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he's struck a deal to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus, which borders Ukraine. Speaking on state TV last night, he insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States stationing its nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. But a top security advisor to Ukraine's president says the plans would destabilise Belarus, claiming Russia has effectively taken the country hostage. US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado killed at least 26 people. CCTV video shows the storm ripping through the roof of a school, throwing debris down corridors. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Around 11,000 residents there are still without power. President Joe Biden has described the images being shared as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. Residents say there was no safe place to hide.
This is the worst I have ever. This is devastating. I have so many family members, friends, memories that has been destroyed.
It's like a freight train that comes through. They thought it lasted 30 minutes. It was 20 seconds. One of the homeowners, said they finally woke up and they looked up and they thought they were dead.
In the face of potential arrest, Donald Trump held a defiant rally in Texas yesterday to kick off his 2024 Republican nomination campaign. It was the former president's first public appearance since speculating last week that he could soon be arrested over hush money payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels. He lashed out against the investigation, claiming he's the most innocent man in the history of the US.
Prosecutorial misconduct is their new tool, and they are willing to use it at levels never seen before. The stakes of this election could not be more clear. Either we surrender to the demonic forces abolishing and demolishing and happily doing so, or we defeat them in a landslide on November 5th, 2024.
Matt Hancock and Kwasi Kwarteng have been caught up in a sting operation, quoting thousands of pounds to consult for a non-existent company. The two former cabinet ministers were approached by a fake South Korean firm set up by Campaign Group, led by donkeys. Mr. Hancock told them his daily rate would be £10,000, whilst Mr. Kwarteng said he would expect to be paid a similar amount every month. MPs are allowed to seek employment outside of Parliament, and there's no accusation of any wrongdoing. You're up to date on GB News now. It's back to Emily.
Yes, you've been getting in touch with me about our big topics today. On the discussion on Ofsted, Daniel has to say, get rid of Ofsted, but keep inspectors like before. The system worked fine when inspectors just turned up. Ofsted was invented for school tables, so parents could go to a common information centre to decide what school to send their child to. In the old days, exam results of schools were published every year. Because the results were key to their performance, we didn't have teachers ignoring the brightest of our children for just a pass grade. Well, there you go. You sound like you might have been a teacher. Robert says Ofsted is an invaluable service in the process of validating the effectiveness of educational practice and must be maintained. Well, there you go, Robert, in favour of Ofsted inspections there. Christine says, while some schools are OK, I believe it is the trustees of trust schools who put the pressure on schools to do more and more, whilst not passing enough money onto the schools to enable these requirements. I know that school trusts, just like hospital trusts, only think about saving money and do not respect the heads' views, and the trust put pressure on the heads. This is from personal experience I have had from schools' heads and staffs. It does seem like there is a huge amount of pressure on head teachers across the country. Peter says a lot of pressure was applied when Ofsted removed the possibility of saying that a school is OK. There is now nothing between good and requires improvement. Being adequate is not a bad thing. It literally means good enough. I didn't know that, actually, that there's a gap between good and requires improvement. That does seem a bit harsh, because requires improvement does sound rather bad, I would say, as a layman. Keep your views coming in. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. While you're at it, we are at GB News. Now, Catherine Forster is back in the studio with me. We're going to be talking about the SNP. We're going to hear who the new leader is tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 2 o'clock in Edinburgh, Murrayfield, home of Scottish rugby. We will find out which of the three is going to be the new...
Now, remind us of the three.
Minister. So, Humza Yousaf is the current health secretary. He's the odds-on favourite. He's seen as the continuity candidate. He was allegedly tipped off before Nicola Sturgeon stood down. So he is the old leadership of the SNP's choice. But of course, it's not up to Nicola Sturgeon. It's up to the 72,000 members. The next And
so that is true. They have 72,000 members.
Yeah, and up until very recently, we heard that they had 100,000, didn't we? Which is partly why Peter Murrell resigned very abruptly, chief executive, of course, and Nicola Sturgeon's husband last week. Anyway, the other likely person who might succeed Nicola Sturgeon is Kate Forbes. She's 32. She's the finance minister. A lot of people felt that she'd blown her campaign up at the very beginning because she's socially very conservative and she wasn't afraid to say so. However, many people like her. Humza Yousaf hasn't got the best record, and a lot of people respect Kate Forbes for being upfront and being honest about her opinions. Then there's Ash Reagan, who has been trailing well behind. She resigned last year over Nicola Sturgeon's gender reform bill. She's not going to get it. Humza is the favourite, but it may well depend. If nobody gets over 50% of the first preference votes, second and third preference will be taken into consideration. So it's perfectly possible that it could be Kate Forbes. So we will find out.
That would be
tomorrow.
Very interesting indeed, because Nicola Sturgeon presented the party as being quite radical in its progressive social justice and those kind of issues, particularly on the gender issue, which led to her downfall, one could argue. But Kate Forbes demonstrates perhaps that the SNP are actually more socially conservative than they were letting on under the leadership of Sturgeon.
It would certainly be a big change, and I think it emphasises that beyond the fact that the Scottish National Party, the clue is in the name, is about independence for Scotland, what else does it stand for? And there's a huge divergence of opinion clearly within it. And Kate Forbes was on maternity leave when Nicola Sturgeon pushed that bill through, the gender recognition bill that was so controversial, that was then blocked by Rishi Sunak's government. 2/3 of people in Scotland apparently did not support it. So it will be fascinating to see what happens now. But the SNP really is in a state of complete disarray in the space of a few weeks. You know, we've gone from Nicola Sturgeon, who, whatever people think about her, was a very effective politician for many years and held the SNP together, to a party that's publicly fighting, all these accusations flying around. I mean, today there's reports in the Times that Nicola Sturgeon's, one of her aides, tried to get Kate Forbes to pull out of the campaign at the very beginning. So all this washing of their dirty laundry is happening, and it's not a great look for them.
No, it's not a great look at all, and that may be why the membership is dwindling, depending on what figures you see. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. We're going to be speaking to someone else, I believe from the SNP, later on in the show to get the Scottish perspective on that leadership race. But it has been quite dramatic. Now, moving on to something rather different, leading lawyers have been accused this week of undermining, or at least attempting to undermine, the legal system by declaring that they will not prosecute climate activists. Think groups like Extinction Rebellion. More than 120 lawyers who are part of a group who call themselves Lawyers Are Responsible are set to sign a declaration of conscience, vowing to refuse their services in prosecuting protesters from eco-groups such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. The group will also refuse to act on behalf of clients involved in oil and gas on the grounds that they are destroying the environment. So joining me to discuss this from both angles is Paul Powsland, barrister and climate activist, and former editor of The Sun newspaper, Kelvin Mackenzie. I think we might have two very different views here indeed. I will start with you, Paul. Now, Paul, have you signed this declaration? Are you one of these barristers who are pledging that to take this strong stance?
I have, yes.
You have? Why?
Because I believe that in the week that the IPCC report has given its final warning to humanity, we as lawyers need to act on our principles and ensure that we are not supporting those, particularly fossil fuel companies, who are leading us to breach the 1.5 degree limit and therefore putting our civilization in peril, as well as causing the deaths of millions of people in the global south.
Well, there you go, Kelvin Mackenzie. This is just the right thing to do, considering our planet may be up in flames soon.
Well, it does make me laugh that barristers, on the one hand, are complaining that they are going broke with the the small amounts of money that they're given by the government, but at the same time are prepared to turn down work from the government when they think that that they don't agree with the attitude or the charge. There is an old-fashioned idea that works in the legal circles where it's a cab off the rank. So if somebody comes to you and says, "Will you represent me?" In this case, it will be the government's. And they, regardless of their own personal views, they do represent them. After all, these are the same barristers who would all turn out for 1,000 a day, 10 grand a day, or whatever, for Begum or some multiple killer or something like that. It doesn't matter how shocking somebody is. These are the same barristers who say everybody's entitled to a defence. And now they're saying that actually the motorist who gets caught up on the M25 or gets caught up in some shocking thing on the Dartford Tunnel with some dreadful kind of people, we're not entitled to be because in essence the government are acting on our behalf against these people. So I seriously hope, I don't know whether the barristers and the KCs ever drive cars or ever go around the M25. Perhaps they should try it and see what they make of being delayed for 6 hours by people who have an argument against oil.
Well, Paul, Kelvin makes a few good points there.
Quite a lot to respond to there.
Pardon? What did you say?
I said quite a lot to respond to there.
Quite a lot to respond to, but I will ask you the first question. I think some viewers will be a tad confused as to why lawyers would refuse to prosecute or refuse to defend based on their political views. Surely that disrupts our basic, rule of law.
Well, in effect, the rule of law is already disrupted by the fact that the oil industry, through its huge wealth, is able to employ vastly more lawyers than are available to ordinary people. There are at the moment thousands of lawyers in the UK being paid millions, tens of millions of pounds to advance the interests of the oil industry. And that gives them huge power.
But like with any industry, Paul, that's the same with any big industry.
Yeah, but any other industry is not committing the great crime that the fossil fuel industry is committing. We know scientifically that if we continue to expand the oil and gas industry, it will lead to millions of deaths. Therefore, they are committing a great crime, and I, on my conscience, will not facilitate them to continue committing that crime. And actually, it goes back to Kelvin's point about, would you defend, I think, a rapist, or would you defend Shamina Begum? I would actually defend in court a fossil fuel executive who was on a charge of murder or whatever it is, but I would not continue to allow them I will not continue to facilitate them to commit that crime. And that's the key difference, because it's the difference between defending someone in a murder trial and advising them how to continue committing murder. That's the key difference here.
Kelvin, do you see that difference?
Well, I admire him as a barrister. I admire him for making that difference. The reality is, the point that your speaker makes is actually a political point. And the answer to what he wants to achieve is not to make a bit of a kerfuffle. I even see, by the way, a couple of KCs are joining in as well, including Byman as well. I didn't even know he was alive. He must be older than me. But so if he wants to change all this, he is not carrying, regardless, look, the science may well be there. I've been hearing a lot about the science over the last few years, so I'm not sure what the science is always as accurate as people would like. If you want to change this, we have to change our governments. And my sense is that the people are not with your argument, right? Look, none of us want 1.5 or anything. I totally buy all that. But you'd have to change the politics of our country. We would literally need a green party involved. And my question is that your ultimate aim? It's a political aim. It's not really a legal aim.
Is that right, Paul? You should go through politics rather than trying to essentially... I think what you're doing is simply virtue signalling. I mean, a lot of the lawyers who have signed this declaration would never be in the position to defend oil and gas companies because that's not the type of law that they do, or they wouldn't really be there to prosecute Extinction Rebellion protests that get out of hand. So it's a bit of PR, isn't it?
I think the system is already politically gamed by the oil industry. As an example, I do civil injunctions. And what's happened recently is oil companies, including Shell, have given a ton of money to lawyers in the City of London. And those lawyers have gone to the High Court to get injunctions that give a greater punishment for protesting on Shell forecourts than you would get normally for just ordinary public order offences. What that is the oil industry buying their own criminal law and using lawyers to do that. So the oil industry is already gaming the system, as are many wealthy companies. It's interesting to know that the charge. Sorry, go ahead.
Paul, I just want to know, do you think ecocide should be a crime? Do you think that any person who works in the oil and gas industry is a criminal in some way? Because the way you talk about an industry that has changed the lives of people around the world for decades, for centuries even. It has transformed our way of life. Countries like China, India, etc. are still pumping out masses of fossil fuels, carbon emissions, etc., etc. In order for our country to become the country it is now, we've needed oil and gas. I don't like this demonisation of people that have fuelled our very existence.
I think the demonisation must go towards expansion of the fossil fuel industry, and that's what our declaration says. It doesn't say we won't act for fossil fuel companies at all. It's about expansion. And obviously we need to have some oil and gas to make the transition across to a renewable society. So we're not saying don't stop using them straight away. It's about we cannot afford to have any further expansion. And I think it's that expansion that is the criminal act. It is doing an act that we know is going to lead to mass death and destruction and potentially the collapse of our own civilization. You know, the International Energy Agency said back in 2021, we cannot have any further expansion of the oil and gas industry if we want to remain within 1.5.
Well, hang on,
so
Paul,
I don't demonise them for what they've done thus far, and I don't demonise them for making the oil and gas that we need for our transition. What I demonise them for is knowingly continuing to expand when we know the consequences of that.
Well, that makes you quite a liberal in the sort of eco-activism world. It seems like a lot of these activists would like to see anyone who's ever worked in oil and gas be, hung, drawn and quartered. Kelvin, do you worry? Well, it's hard to know where to go with this, really. There's so many things. I mean, just on the climate stuff, we've heard for so long that, this year is the end of the world. If we don't change now, the whole world is going to be, no more, essentially. It's hard to know what to believe.
Well, I must say the expression "the collapse of civilization," which was just used just now, I don't buy that. But look, I'm a good bit older than your speaker. Therefore, if it does collapse, then I've had a very good run out of petrol. But if it doesn't collapse, which I suspect is the case, then a lot of this is really a politicization of the law, which is fine because it represents a very small amount. And the other aspect is, if I'm a barrister on the other side, I'm thinking to myself, happy days, the government are coming to me. I'm the only person that's prepared to represent them against a group of people who are damaging the lives of ordinary folk going about their business. We're not talking about big oil and gas companies. I'm talking about the plumber and the bricklayer making their way around the M25 and getting caught up at the Dartford Tunnel because there's some halfwit sitting on the bridge up there. Now, that is what I want to see stopped. If he could guarantee that under his system, I would be delighted. So I could carry on rocketing around the M25 without having to worry about whether I'm going to run over some hippie's foot.
Well, there you go. A compromise is to be had, perhaps, Paul. But just very lastly, I just want to ask you whether you think it is concerning. Do you think our society is well served by lawyers becoming activists? I mean, take away the issue of climate change, just in general.
I think lawyers already are activists. It's a question of who they're activists for. And we already have thousands of lawyers who are activists for the fossil fuel companies because those companies pay them a lot of money, far more than I earn, probably 10 times, if not more, than what I earn doing the work that I'm doing. They are already activists in advancing their causes. And to Kelvin, I would say, if you don't like those protesters doing that kind of protest, what kind of protest do you advocate in the face where I think you've admitted earlier that some is necessary in order to stop us breaching the 1.5 degree target? What what do you recommend, Kelvin? Please do tell us.
I'll tell you what I'd recommend.
What would you do?
I'd recommend that you get into Westminster Square and you walk around there and you do what most people do, which is whether they're complaining about their pay or they're complaining about climate change. You know as well as I do that politicians have to take on a bulk of protest. And the reality with your argument is that, unfortunately, many clever people like yourself do have this view. The public do not buy it and enjoy filling up their cars or enjoy the fact when they can afford it, by the way, having a heated house through gas. So the reality is, unfortunately, you are a minority. I'm not saying that in 20 years' time you won't be a majority. When you are a majority, then, of course, you will see change. You're not seeing it at the moment because the ordinary man and woman in the street doesn't buy the 1.5. That's the reality. Your PR is not good enough. The science may not be good enough. But anyway, people don't want it. They are not going to be forced into it.
May I just add that I would like to also see climate activists, campaigning against the Chinese Communist Party. They keep building coal plants, don't they? And the same in India, same in most of the developing world. I'd just add that. Thank you very much indeed, barrister and climate activist Paul Powsden. Thank you for your time. And former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie there. Now, you've been getting in touch on this very subject. Should we prosecute climate activists? Helen says, let them sign the declaration, but then bar them from practicing law. It's disgraceful the lawyers are making a fortune and fighting against what the British public want. Activists prosecuted and economic migrants deported. They have become too big for their boots. I do think a lot of people would agree with you there. Steve says, I would not want one of these barristers defending me. Well, I wonder if you are an eco-protester or in the oil and gas industry. Sue says, if these barristers are so gullible to believe what the UN says about the urgency of saving the planet, I would not want them to defend me, but I would be happy for them to try and prosecute. Well, there you go. Keep your views coming in to me at gbviews@gbnews.uk. You are watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. England takes on Ukraine later today in the qualifying match for the Euros 2024. Our reporter, Paul Hawkins, will be outside Wembley Stadium ahead of the kick-off. Before we speak to him, let's get the weather with Rachel Ayers.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and Northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now further south, there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away from this, skies will clear to start the new week, allowing for plenty of sunshine and fine and dry weather. It'll be feeling pleasant in that sunshine, but temperatures will not be much higher tomorrow than what we'll have seen today, with highs of around 11 degrees. As we go into Monday afternoon and evening, we do cling on to those bright, clearer skies across the north and the east as we go through to Monday night. But further west, we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic as that next low pressure system moves in. So a cloudier, milder night here. But across the northern and eastern areas, we could just see a patchy frost still to start Tuesday morning. But it will be a short-lived frost as that cloud and rain will quickly move in from the west through Tuesday morning. We could just see a little bit of snow over the high ground of Scotland and northern England on the leading edge of that. And that sets up the weather for much of next week. We'll be remaining unsettled with some showers or rain, but temperatures will be on the up, particularly from midweek.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back. It's 2:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Offenders who commit to antisocial behaviour will be forced to clean up their communities as part of the Prime Minister's new immediate justice scheme. Under the plans set to be announced tomorrow, local authorities will be given fresh powers to quickly and visibly punish criminals. Those who spray graffiti or commit other vandalism will have to fix the damage within 48 hours of being given the order. Other penalties include picking up litter, washing police cars or doing unpaid work in shops. Well, as part of the crackdown, the government has also announced a ban on the sale of laughing gas. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove told broadcasters nitrous oxide canisters are helping to fuel antisocial behaviour by turning public spaces into so-called drug-taking arenas. US President Joe Biden has declared a state of emergency in Mississippi after a tornado killed at least 26 people. CCTV video shows the storm ripping through the roof of a school, throwing debris down corridors. The twister swept through the state and into Alabama, cutting a path of destruction 170 miles long. Around 11,000 people there are still without power. Joe Biden has described the images being shared as heartbreaking and has offered federal support for the recovery. Ukraine has condemned Vladimir Putin's plan to store tactical nuclear weapons in neighbouring Belarus. Kyiv's foreign ministry has slammed the announcement as provocative and is calling for a UN Security Council session. Speaking on state TV last night, the Russian president insisted it wasn't unusual, comparing it with the United States stationing its nuclear weapons on the territory of European allies. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Emily.
Right, England face Ukraine today in the European qualifiers, with manager Gareth Southgate warning his players there is no room for sentiment once they get onto the pitch. The Three Lions will face Ukraine for the first time since the horrific invasion of their country and will be looking to add to their victory against Italy midweek. Joining me live from Wembley Stadium is our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, you're with the Ukrainian fans there.
Yeah, 4,000 expected at Wembley today for an 85,000 capacity. And in fact, the FA have given 1,000 free tickets to English families that have hosted Ukrainian refugees and, of course, the refugees themselves. Frankly, there were going to be 4,000 fans amongst a crowd of 85,000. Right now, it feels like I'm in the minority, if I'm honest. Guys, how are you feeling about the game?
Oh yeah, it's like exciting. Of course, we are excited, and we hope we are win. It is the biggest opportunity for us. Thank you very much for this free ticket. We will support, of course, our team, and we hope we are win.
Yeah, because this is more than just a football match, isn't it?
Well, I hope we will win, but honestly, I don't mind if we don't.
You don't, but you also mind if you don't. Yeah. How are you feeling about watching Ukraine?
So I'm actually very excited because I haven't been at any of the games. So I hope we're gonna win.
Yeah.
Because it's really important this era for us.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah.
Yeah, and many of you have come over from Ukraine because of the war. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah? Where are you from in Ukraine?
From Kharkiv.
Yeah. Okay. And just tell us about what the situation is like back home at the moment.
We win in our victory. We win in our victory in war when Russia attacked Ukraine. You know about it, and we believe in the Slava Ukraini.
Yeah. Okay. I said I'd have a go at saying it. Slava Ukraini. Is that right?
Yeah. Slava Ukraini. Yeah.
Slava Ukraini. Yeah. just tell us about the relationship between the two countries, between England and Ukraine now.
I think it is amazing what the British people done for us. Thank you very much. We can just say from bottom of our heart for British nation. So for this big support, which we can't survive without that.
Yeah, and who's going to win?
I don't know. I hope the best team, but I can be a little bit cheeky, so of course Ukraine.
Yeah. How are you guys feeling about the game then?
So I'm pretty excited for this, and it was like I'm interested with football. So yeah, I believe we're gonna win, and I believe we're gonna win the war.
Yeah.
And we're gonna come back home.
Yeah. It's more than just a football match, isn't it?
Yeah.
Listen, it's more than just a football match. There's obviously big undercurrent to this game. From the England perspective, there's going to be a kind of some recognition for Harry Kane as well, who's now England's top goal scorer following that 2-1 win against Italy on Thursday. But for Ukraine, it's a very emotional occasion. England-Ukraine today. And then, of course, there's Eurovision later in the year when England are hosting it on behalf of Ukraine in Liverpool. So lots of England-Ukraine connections and UK-Ukraine connections coming up throughout the summer.
But it looks like the England team aren't going to be going lightly on Ukraine nonetheless.
No, one would have thought not, but you never know. Look, when England played Italy on Thursday, the first half they were fantastic. The second half they were very mediocre, and they saw out the last 10 minutes with 10 men. They did very well, but if England played like they did in the second half, and Ukraine are on their game, and remember, Ukraine are coming into this pretty fresh. They haven't had much time to practice. They've been playing Brentford behind closed doors, but they'll be much fresher than the England players. And if England have an off day and Ukraine are on their game, they've got players like Zinchenko who plays for Arsenal. So they can cause England problems, and England certainly won't underestimate them.
Well, there you go, an exciting and important match for many reasons. Thank you very much indeed, Paul Hawkins, our reporter there outside Wembley ahead of tonight's game, England versus Ukraine. Now, before we move on, today you have been getting in touch a lot, actually, on our big topics of the day. On policing, Bob has to say the Tories have been in government for 13 years and all sorts of crime and policing issues are still here. Plus, a Home Secretary obsessed with culture wars and anti-asylum seeker rhetoric isn't doing anyone favours. That's Bob's response to my question of whether we should be trusting the Tories or Labour when it comes to crime. They've all been giving out their plans, telling us their plans to crack down on various forms of crime. So who do you trust? Now, on the barristers refusing to prosecute climate activists, Dave says these barristers are being judge and jury. They have no right to do this. Fire them and disbar them so they cannot work in the legal profession again. Then let the police prosecute as they used to. Yes, it's worth noting that some people within the legal profession have come out very much against this. They don't think it serves the legal profession well at all. Craig says, surely barristers who say they are conscientious objectors are showing legal bias, so therefore would said barristers be able ever to offer legal representation in any legal matter due to possible prejudice? That's a very good point indeed. And Vera has to say, I always thought that lawyers were intelligent people, but if they won't prosecute these people, hit them in the pocket with huge fines for breaking the law and let ordinary people carry on with their lives. Strong stuff there. Please do keep your views coming in. We love to read them and also share them with you at home. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We're at GB News. You are, of course, watching and listening to GB News Sunday with Emily Carver. Plenty more to come this afternoon, including voting will close tomorrow in the contest to succeed Nicola Sturgeon and become Scotland's next First Minister. Who will become the new leader of the SNP? We'll break it down in just a few moments.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching and listening to GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. Now, the government is expected to make an announcement in the coming weeks on how it plans to stop housing migrants in hotels. Suella Braverman has signalled it wants to end the practice, which she says costs around £6 million a day. The Daily Telegraph has reported that disused ferries are being considered to house people, but this has not been yet confirmed. Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, joins me now. Stephen, lovely to speak to you again. I feel like I talk to you quite a lot, actually, but that's because you're so excellent at this topic. Tell me, what's the latest when it comes to the illegal immigration bill? I've seen that there are various amendments that are going to be put forward.
Well, flattery always works, and that'll keep me coming on, Emily. I really appreciate that. I think what you're seeing now is following a briefing that several of us who are very interested in the proposals of the government's immigration bill by those in the Home Office. They're now following through with some of those points that they indicated would come after the bill was presented to Parliament and start to go through its process. The first of those was that they would be looking at how they would house those illegal migrants who arrive here and then they decide within 28 days they need to be placed somewhere else. So the fact that they're considering offshore centres, which are ferries in this case, or indeed used Royal Navy bases, is an indication of what they told us would happen. I think what you'll see now through Parliament is there's going to be some more amendments which will indicate how they're going to be transported to them, what the costs are, the reductions in the use of hotels. although I can't see how that will work very quickly. And I also suspect they're going to start looking at how they could respond to some of the potential legal challenges that will come because of our membership of the ECHR.
I mean, the use of ferries, it sounds a little bit far-fetched. I imagine a lot of people would think that's not a particularly nice place to house migrants, perhaps not particularly appropriate. But have ferries been used in other countries? Is this something that's normal?
Well, I think one first takes ourselves back to the principles of the UN Convention on Refugees, which does give opportunities and powers for governments of how they deal with the applications for asylum in their country and how they house them. And if you look across many of the African countries, or indeed some of the places where the biggest amounts of people are held, like Pakistan, you will see large tented communities, sometimes in very hot conditions. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the tented communities where asylum applicants and the displaced are placed. So in principle, there isn't anything that says that they have to be placed in a hotel or in accommodation. And I think the government has done tremendously well with the fact that we've got nearly 400 hotels being used. And they do have to think how else we can house people, when I think at the moment we're looking at maybe 51, 52,000 people in hotels, and we've got more to come, an estimate of 80,000 this year.
Yes, I mean, this hotel situation is becoming more absurd by the day. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Now, there's another amendment from some Tory moderates I've read about that is about unaccompanied children, giving them a different status, that they wouldn't be deported to Rwanda, for example, in the same way. Is that right?
Yes, there is. I mean, this is one of the big question marks that came out and was quite surprising when I was looking at it, is that there is a potential claim that when somebody is deemed to be a UASC, which is an unaccompanied child, that is someone under the age of 18. And in the proposals, they would be permitted to remain in the United Kingdom. But once they reached 18, there would be this particular opportunity for the government then to remove them to Rwanda. So I think what you've got is a balance between those of the Liberal Conservatives who have genuine concerns about how we deal with unaccompanied children, how our perception in the world is, and whether it is fair and right to have a proposal that removes these children once they turn 18. I think we've got to look very carefully at this. I do think that this is going to be a part that's going to be challenged very heavily, not only in Parliament, but also at the House of Lords. We do have a greater responsibility to children. There isn't a large number. Since 2000, there's only been about 18,000 to 19,000 what's called unaccompanied children come to the UK, and many of them have latterly been found to be older than 18. So it is an important point, and it will be challenged.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how this bill ends up being chopped and changed. I imagine it will go back and forth quite a bit to get it right or acceptable to Parliament. Thank you very much indeed, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity there, Stephen Wolfe. Now, back to the SNP, the new leader, and Scotland's new First Minister will be announced tomorrow. The Scottish public are more favourable towards Kate Forbes than towards Humza Yousaf, apparently, although none of the three candidates for First Minister receives a positive approval rating. Not very good. So how will tomorrow pan out? Political commentator and former SNP member, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, joins me now. Stuart, you're a former member of the SNP. I assume you're not particularly impressed by the offering currently.
Good afternoon, Emily. Yes, I would say, as we say up here, that the three candidates don't quite set the heather on fire. But you're quite right in your introduction that Kate Forbes has the widest appeal to the electorate, whereas Humza Yousaf is the SNP hierarchy establishment favoured candidate and seen as the continuity man. I think that the SNP is making the classic mistake that all political parties make when they're electing a new leader. They elect an individual who is most attractive to them as party members, rather than looking outside at the wider electorate and saying who is most likely to be voted into power by the general public. And I think that mistake is being made in terms of favouring Humza Yousaf. But it's too close to call. I have previously said that I think Kate Forbes might just win it by a whisker, and we'll wait to see tomorrow.
It's very interesting, actually, as a spectator to all this, to see that Kate Forbes, a Christian, relatively socially conservative, is doing so well. In comparison to Humza Yousaf, he's also, you could say they're neck and neck, but he was going to be the continuity candidate. Nicola Sturgeon presented herself very much as a progressive, yet the membership seemed to be quite on board with Kate Forbes' offering. What do you put that down to?
Well, I think that there's nothing like a new broom to sweep clean after Nicola Sturgeon stood down after 8 years. I think in terms of her tenure of the position of First Minister, we can probably use the old Chinese proverb that there was loud thunder but few raindrops. Much bluster and bluff and bluster about independence, but really the position, or the Scottish public's position on Scottish independence, hasn't shifted at all since the last referendum in 2014. So I think we Scots are actually sort of naturally conservative, with a small c, perhaps.
Yes, I mean, I am half Scottish myself, and I would concur with that, I think, from my experience anyway. Stuart, you said that the polls haven't changed too much in terms of independence. I've been seeing polls, I must be looking at different polls, because I've seen that actually support for Scottish independence is very much down.
Well, it is at the moment. If you take the sort of the overall sort of average since 2014 and extract the don't knows from all the polls, I think you'll find that those in favour of independence are about 47% of those polled, and those against are 53%, and for the union. And that hasn't changed over the past 8 years. So really, Nicola Sturgeon, who has been a fantastically successful politician as an individual, has not been able to deliver what her party and she presumably stands for. And there is no place for the Scottish independents to go at the moment.
And lastly, what do you make of all the high-profile resignations? It does look to the public as if the SNP is, well, falling apart.
Well, yes, I mean, I think we could say that the SNP is in some turmoil. And I don't know why Nicola Sturgeon had to resign so precipitously. No doubt that'll come out in the wash. But those of us who are sort of observing it fairly closely could see this coming several months ago. Despite all the denial, she did look rather tired and as if she'd had enough of that particular job. But why her husband then resigned, and then John Swinney resigned as Deputy First Minister, and then Murray Foot signed as the head of communications for the SNP in the Scottish Parliament, and of course Scotland's Chief Constable has resigned with 2 years to go in his contract. And I don't know what's going on here, but certainly we're all interested in the outcome of the police investigation into the so-called missing £600,000 in the SNP party's accounts.
Now, just very lastly, before you go, do you think it's fair to say that Nicola Sturgeon perhaps should have spent more of her time and prioritised domestic policy rather than just the independence campaign? Do you think that's something that Kate Forbes, Humza Yousaf, if they get the leadership, will be more focused on health, education, crime, etc., rather than constantly pushing the independence narrative?
Yes, I think so. If it's all really predicated on how these individuals see independence being delivered, if it ever is. The gradualists, of course, try to persuade those who are not yet independent supporters by proving competence in governing under the devolved settlement. But sadly, the SNP in administration has proved to be completely inept. And you don't need me to go through all the sort of disasters that have befallen us. Education down the pan, the ferries fiasco, and so on and so forth. So I think very much the focus will return under Kate Forbes, certainly, to the domestic agenda to try and persuade that persuade the Scottish voting public that they're worthy of government before they actually do any more on the independence thing.
Well, we shall see. Thank you very much indeed. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, their political commentator and former SNP member. Now, don't go anywhere, because coming up on GB News is Nana Queer, and she's with me in the studio right now.
Hello.
SNP in turmoil. You hate to see it.
Well, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it, really? It's no surprise there. I mean, what a ridiculous idea this whole gender reform thing was. It was obviously going to collapse, and it's collapsed the party. But we won't be talking about that because you've done it so well. We are in similar colours, though, I must say.
We are. We're looking great.
I know. But in my show, we're going to be I'm going to kick it off with Martin Daubney and also James, who used to work with Jeremy Corbyn, and we're going to be discussing...
exciting stuff.
I know, it's quite exciting. He was actually on breakfast, which he shouldn't have done. It's fine. It's fine. We forgive you, James. But we'll be discussing all the big topics. We'll be talking about, obviously, the whole thing with Brexit. We'll be looking at net zero. They're planning to bring that down by 10 years to 2040 instead of 2050.
Goodness me.
Which is just ridiculous. And we'll also be looking at the full story with regard to the French, because, you know, the French have been quite militant in the fact that the pension age should be rising.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, listen, frankly, I love working, so I'm not bothered about it. See, like, I would hope that I could work all my life because I love my job, so I don't believe I ever work a day in my life. So I think that's a secret to it. But yeah, I'd be pretty annoyed if I was sort of approaching the age and then they move the goalposts. So yeah.
Yes, that's true. I got a bit of grief yesterday for suggesting that they should calm down and accept that they have to work a little longer. Apparently, that's not the popular opinion. Anyway, you've been watching GB News Sunday with me, Emily Carver. That is all we've got time for today. The show will be back next weekend. On Saturday, I will leave you with the weather first.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. So looking ahead to the start of next week, and after a cold night, we'll see some drier and more settled weather becoming established across the UK. And this is all due to a change in our bigger weather picture. So this morning's low pressure across the southeast will move away, and this will allow some northerly winds to set up, bringing some colder air across the whole of the UK to start Monday. But back to this evening, and we'll see some showers persisting across northern and eastern coasts, and these could just be wintry for a time. But skies will clear, allowing for a widespread harsh frost across Northern Ireland, Scotland and northern England tonight, where we could see temperatures dropping as low as -6 to -8. Now, further south, there'll be some patchy cloud around, but there could still be a patchy frost to start Monday and maybe just the odd shower too. But away